help if I turn on my mic. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. My name is Alexi Boyd, your trusted advisor, all things advocate of small business and lover of my listeners, really, of all people. We've got a very special guest on the show today, and I'm super excited to be welcoming Alan McDougall from Key Point Law, because we're going to talk about something that's really quite crucial. It's beyond important. It's actually quite crucial if you're running a business. It's especially crucial if you're serious about running a business and you want to look at your longevity and long-term ability to be sustainable as well. There's an important factor which a lot of small businesses don't consider when they start, and usually they fumble around midway through their progression and realise that they need them, and that is contracts. So Alan is a specialist in contract law, and he's going to assist us with helping to understand where you need to put them in place. When do you engage with a contract, whether it be a supplier, a client, it might be an employee, it might be buying or selling a business. When is it really important that you have them, and why is it there, and why do they protect you in particular from adverse reactions, or perhaps just protecting you and giving you some peace of mind if nothing untoward was to happen? So we're talking about those today. We're talking about the importance of having them in place to begin with, but also maybe ways that you can put them in place after you've had a negative impact on your business. So welcome to the show, Alan. Thank you very much for coming today.
Morning, Alexi. It's nice to be here.
Now, tell me a little bit about Key Point Law. Why is it that you decided to specialise or look more at contract law? What makes you passionate about helping small business?
Well, I like to fight the good fight, I guess, is the short answer. Alexi, more and more I see business people struggling to find their way in the morass, the thicket of regulation and laws, and often unsatisfactory behaviour by big companies, by other businesses their size. I like to help set the ground rules and make sure the ground rules are in place.
And because that helps to protect a business for the future, it helps to it almost makes you look more professional, doesn't it, when you've got these sort of things in place?
Absolutely right. I think it's a bad look if your business contracts, your terms and conditions are a bit non-existent even, or a bit out of date, a bit fusty. We lawyers speak a lot of plain English these days, you'll be pleased to hear, and that plain English is more and more reflected in the contracts we write and the contracts we advise you on.
It used to be that if you engage with a company that was any bigger than yours, they would sort of slap down this huge supplier agreement that was 30 or 40 pages long and expect you to sign it immediately. That's not the case these days.
Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because in recent times there have been so-called unfair contract laws brought in, business to business. If you're a small business, you've got more protection than ever, particularly in the realms of standard form contracts. The big guys are on notice as of 12th of November last year. So you've got your small business listeners have a bit of ammunition on their side now. It's not all one way, and all consumers, of course, have been protected by this kind of law for a lot longer. But now small business is in the mix, and there are definitions of what that is and what that isn't. But really, any business contract now, you've got to be careful. Both sides have got to be mindful that one cannot have it all his or her own way.
And it's quite interesting the way you say that that massive juggernaut of paperwork that we used to get plonked at us, it doesn't exist. It does not exist anymore. But is that part of pressurising system that big business used to put on small business?
Well, yeah, it's multifaceted. I'm always appalled at the amount of paperwork that is dumped on business, whether from bigger organisations or even smaller groups, smaller businesses. It's a sign of the times, and I don't support it. I'm for simplicity. I know we get paid for analysing complexity, we lawyers, and dealing with it, but wherever possible, I'm for some simplicity. However, regulation is pervasive. Government regulations, tax more than ever, company laws. It's not just about we lawyers getting shifty or big guys trying to do you over. It's unfortunately the world we live in.
Yeah, we have to make sure that we understand what we're talking about, because we are existing and we're doing business in this world. We have to face the facts and we have to be prepared for it and understand what we're stepping into.
I think so. A forewarned is forearmed. You know, you've got your earlier point, I think business people, small, medium business, should have a standard set of T's and C's, as we say, terms and conditions in place. And it doesn't take too much effort, and it's a one-off expense, really, and you're good to go. And you just need to have that protection and to get your product out there, get your service out there, and know where you stand.
I think one of the things that we become quite overwhelmed with in the legal world as small businesses, we don't wear that hat, we don't understand it. We kind of have a broad idea of what we should protect ourselves against, and we understand about insurances and how they play a role in protecting us. But I think what I find overwhelming is the fact that I think, I've got to have a contract with my clients, and I've got to have a contract with my suppliers, and then I've got to have a contract for these guys and these guys and these guys. Is that just a state of overwhelm is just unrealistic? If you actually engage with someone like yourselves, then it doesn't need to be that complex?
Well, I'd like to say yes, it doesn't need to be that complex. Look, you can cut the cloth to suit the wearer, really. It depends on what your needs are, what your resources are. Look, often you're going to have to sign contracts from others, from bigger suppliers. It's a fact of life, or a big client group. Even if you provide professional services, you might be a small contractor or advisor, and you get a big corporate client, and they have a standard form, and you've got to run with that and accept it. It needn't be horrendous. It needn't be a ghastly experience. But if you want to deliver your service or your product, it does help to have someone have a quick look over that kind of thing.
And you able to, the reality of things, I think, is when you are engaging with a big client like that, of course you're going to sign basically whatever they put in front of you.
Basically, yeah.
But can you, in the real world, do you see people countering that with a contract of their own, or do you think realistically that doesn't really happen?
It doesn't really happen.
You just have to make sure that what you're signing is not
you
stuffing
understand what you're getting into. That's right. And as I said earlier, there are more protections than ever these days. You can't get screwed, I don't believe, if you go in with your eyes wide open. And do read your contracts, or if you don't have someone read it for you, make sure you read it yourself. So I'm always surprised how people do not do that. And it's a simple protection. If something puzzles you, ask. Do your homework.
They probably can't answer it at their end either. They'd have to go back to their legal team.
That's right. They might not understand it either.
Yeah.
That's right.
One of those big things that are in contracts that I think come from clients that can be really big and scary is the end of the month plus 2 months or plus 3 months for payment terms.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. We want those clients, we want those big boys, but we don't want to have the outgoings in the beginning. Say, for example, let's take a video production company. You've got to do a shoot, you've got to do a multi-camera shoot. It's probably going to cost you about 10 grand in outgoings. You're getting paid 20 grand for the shoot itself, but you're not going to get that money for 3 months. So if you sign that away with their contract because they go, well, tough titties, that's basically what our payment terms are. Have you got any flexibility there if you've got outgoings? I mean, can you basically sign one of those contracts in the real world and then go, listen, guys, I've got 10,000 of outgoings, or I've got X amount of outgoings. I need you to pay a deposit. Is there any flexibility with those big boys?
Well, that's a good point. And if I think you can always ask, you should ask, and maybe there is that flexibility. That's a big issue politically too, with very big customers leaving payment for months and months, and the smaller supplier has to wait. And so the first thing to do is know what you're signing up to, or even and when you see the contract, ask the question, and then you have to adjust your commercial realities accordingly. Well, I really want this client, this customer. This is how it's going to be. I hate it. That's the important thing, knowing what you're signing up to.
With all of your experience dealing with contractual law, do you think that a change to the government is needed? I mean, I know in France they've accelerated their economy by making all invoice terms a compulsory 2-week turnaround. Now, the government here, federal and state level, have both turned around and said, we're the biggest mover and shaker in the economy, so we're going to guarantee to pay everyone within 30 days, which they've promised to do. but they're trying to lead from the front.
Yeah.
Is it really that difficult in terms of legislation and the impact it would have on yourselves and the contract lawyers to make that 2-week turnaround? I mean, I don't. To me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
If a country like France can do it and several other European countries, just do it. Just say that it's compulsory 2-week turnaround and then people start paying interest. Would that not accelerate the economy? I mean, is there something not working?
It would get the money circulating faster.
Is there anything from your
agree.
perspective, as a legal person?
I touched on unfair contract laws earlier. They do not specifically deal with that very real issue. The European countries you mentioned have a different, more intrusive legal system than traditionally
True.
we Anglos do. We start out from freedom of contract, so called, and we're getting a little less free probably for good reason in instances you mentioned there. At the moment, there's nothing that obliges people to pay on time.
Yeah. Awesome. But we do. As small businesses, we do, because we don't want to stuff up the little guys.
Well, we value our business reputation. We want repeat business. For big suppliers, big groups, they often think they'll get it anyway. If they have competitors, that might sharpen their response times. But at the moment, we don't. It is in the press. I've seen it, what you're referring to, but we don't have it. It's a little unusual for our kind of contractual environment, but that's not to say something won't be done.
Nah, that would in the perfect world, that'd be awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of contracts you should consider having in place, and what you can do to prepare to put those things into place as a business. So you've come to someone like Keypoint Law, you want to engage with them, you want to say, okay, all right, I need to get these things in place. Let's have a look at you dealing with a contractor. So you're a small business, you bring someone on board to provide you with a particular job for a project or something like that, and you want to engage with them as a contractor. What would you expect to exchange, and what information needs to be absolutely definitely there in the contract?
Okay, well, look, you should have a contractor's agreement. That is a fairly typical form of contract now. It's different from an employment agreement where you have staff full-time or part-time permanently working for you. I think you're getting at a contractor who has one or more clients, and to be a genuine contractor, you most likely you will have more than one client.
Yes, that's right. It's definitely not someone we're talking about an employee.
Yeah, but look, that's not a big ask in terms of a legal output and in terms of cost. A small business could not have a standard form contractors agreement. They're pretty common, and you should have one in your bottom drawer if you're bringing on people like that.
And quick question, legally, all these contracts, they can be signed electronically and they're still considered legal, or do they need wet ink?
Quick answer, yes, they can be signed electronically.
That's good. That's good news. Try and reduce the amount of paperwork.
More than ever.
Yeah.
Digital signature, more than ever, yeah. Signing a contract goes to proof. If you want to get paid, you've got to prove there was a bargain or contract in existence, and the more and more these days, it's hard to disown a digital signature or some sort of substantiation.
Or an email trail.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's proof. Ultimately, it's proof. And you want to be comfortable that the other person's bound, and that's not that difficult if you have that paper trail and or a docu-signature or something like that.
Yeah, I know with if anybody out there who owns a Mac, for instance, you can take a photo of your signature and permanently add it to your preview program, and then you can just cut and paste it into that.
Well, and we do that at Keypoint Law too, that we sign our engagement letters in the same vein. I haven't scrawled in pen and ink for as long as I can remember.
It's very digital native of you.
Yes, well, we're very proactive at Keypoint Law. We have lots of innovations where we say we're a disruptive firm, and we feel we offer a bit more than the traditional law firm.
Well, the fact that you're talking about the notion that we shouldn't be having to spend too much money on these things, and that's definitely disruptive from a legal standpoint.
Well, yes, Well, yes, that's right.
Now
no comment.
We're going to take a quick break here on Triple H and listen to some community service announcements. We'll be back after this. You're listening to Small Biz Matters. So, Alan, today we are talking about contract law, and it's something that, once you put the word law in a sentence, can become a bit big and scary for small business, I think, and what we like to do is try and educate our listeners here on Small Biz Matters. So just before the break, we were talking a little bit about engaging with contractors. It's a bit of a must. A lot of us already have those contracts in place. One of the things I think in the contracts that you have with external people needs to be a bit of confidentiality. Would you agree? Do you think that's a really important aspect of... Because they're going to find out a lot about your business, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. And we can build that into to a contractor's agreement or any contract or relationship. I just say confidentiality is hard to sue over, actually. Not impossible, but it's always a question of proof. What damage did you suffer? But look, don't be scared off by bolting in an appropriate term and condition in that regard. It's better to have something than nothing. But yeah, look, you can't. You have to trust people to some extent, and we can't. We can't protect against not trustworthy people. That's what we can do our best, but not totally. You have to assess the person you're contracting with.
Now, I've come across a couple of incidences in the last couple of months with my own clients who have engaged with a contractor. They've placed them into an external business on their behalf, and they're sort of operating under their business name, and they've ended up going directly to the client. Now, they had these, and this goes to what you were saying before about having not necessarily protections in place, but a bit of trust in the exercise. Is there anything we can do to protect against that?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, you're going one step further. Restraints certainly can be written into the agreement, and they are enforceable, more so than, say, misusing confidential information per se. Oh, yeah, no, that's a very real tool in the legal kit, and restraints. Up to a point are a valid way of protecting, say, a client list being stolen or something like that.
Or even going directly to the client and taking that work.
Well, that is a risk. Yeah, and that is a risk it is a risk. We can do something for the client in that regard. We can't guarantee anything, but we can put protections in place. And if you can allege that your clients have been overridden and stolen, well, we can do something for you, but messy. I hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it still comes down to that trust exercise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what that process is. Once you've got those contracts in place, everyone's signed it, and you end up having one of those people that does go directly to the client. Do you then issue them with a warning letter, a cease and desist letter, and then you threaten to take... What exactly is the process?
A very stern lawyer's letter. It sounds a bit innocuous perhaps in these days, but that's the opening gambit, and if you can then point to a substantial financial impact by possibly losing a client or losing an engagement, well, that's money that you can quite possibly claim back from your errant contractor. So I in my experience, I've found that a stiff lawyer's letter, and it's a serious one too, carries a lot of weight. It has a desirable impact. It brings people to the table, at least, and if that's where you want to meet them. So look, I would get forthwith get a lawyer involved. Frankly, talking my own book a bit, but it comes if it's a signal to the errant contractor or player that you are very serious. You're, even if not outraged by what's going on, you're suffering loss potentially. The other party doesn't know how much, and you want it stopped.
Oh, so if in your experience it does have an impact, then it sounds like it's definitely worth at least engaging at that step.
I do. Even if all you do is get us to write a letter, and you carry the ball from there, and there's a negotiation or some sort of reconciliation. Well, we've played our part. We've done our bit. We're in and out. Yeah.
Well, and that sounds like a good solution. Now, a trickier scenario is having these sort of contracts with a supplier. I don't see it happen very frequently where you come... Can you give us an example of where someone might actually engage with a supplier and have a contract in place?
Yeah, okay. Traditionally the supplier will have a contract for you. But it happens where you are bigger than the supplier, that it might be better if you provide the contract. This happens in complicated or high-value products, but it is a conundrum when both the customer and the supplier wish to assert a set of terms and conditions to govern the transaction. Generally, it's the side with the greater leverage or size wins, but that doesn't mean the other party cannot negotiate. So, look, you do see that, but it's more the case where the supplier, and I'm thinking goods here, not so much services. Oh, well, it might apply too. The supplier, the consultant is small, is a single business person. The customer might be, as I said earlier, a corporate or a big concern. It will have a contract for you, and that can be the way to go at times.
And it's like particularly what you mentioned there with stock. I think that's because you've got something that's quite tangible and has value to it.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that things are being delivered on time, that the quality of the product that they say they're going to deliver is adequate, because you don't want to do things like lose your deposit.
Exactly right. The contracts are good across time, where the relationship doesn't end with a one-off. Delivery of goods, delivery of stock over time. You want quality assurance, you want timeliness, arrangements for payment. That's where really business contracts come in. High value or over time. They're the scenarios.
And a quick question for you. I used to work for a company, and we used to deal with coffee cups, which is terribly non-political. They have a very bad look these days. We don't do it anymore. But we used to deal with coffee cups, and we would engage with someone in China because that was the cheapest place to get them. And one time we had literally a container full of trucks arrive, and there were about 500,000 cups in there. Every single one of them leaked, and we literally lost 2/3 of the cafes that we were servicing overnight because of this leaked batch. Now, when you're dealing with China, you have to pay up front. And because it was a Chinese-based firm, they didn't have offices in Hong Kong, which apparently is a little bit easier to negotiate with. And because they delivered the goods, had already taken the money, they basically just walked away and said, well, tough. So is it more difficult with suppliers to enforce that across country borders, as particularly with China? Because they don't recognise our contractual law. Is that where it sits? I can't quite remember.
Well, yeah, it is more difficult, and it gets down to trust more than ever. That's an unfortunate example you've given. There are always arrangements through the banking system to delay payment, to part pay. I think that was a payment issue there. They said pay up front. Perhaps you'd have done it differently with a small order to test product quality. But yeah, look, with international transactions and the more remote they are from our legal system, the greater the risk you're taking. It is a commercial risk substantially.
And I guess that's what the other side to getting cheaper goods is that you have to deal with a less reliable legal and quality.
And an unknown legal system. There's no enforcement, basically, and that applies whether it's coffee cups or something more high-end, whether it's from China or another source in Asia, even in a comparable jurisdiction like North America or the UK. I guess you'd have greater certainty of doing the deal you want. But when the legal systems are different and you are a small customer in a
you've got to take someone to international court.
You wouldn't. You just wouldn't happen.
No.
And so that's an unfortunate example. But it points up that internationally you really have to feel each other out a bit and get a sense for what's on offer and what you're going to get. And look, I did a few years ago. I did garments being manufactured in Poland for distribution here in Australia. The contract, what did we do? We started out with our complicated Anglo version of contracts, and they sort of threw up their hands and said, "Here's a very simple English translated Polish contract, but we'll make it right for you," and they did. So
simple is best.
Well,
as you said.
yeah, and a small order to start. So international transactions, everyone's different. I can't give a hard and fast other than for a small business or any business to really understand your customer before you sign up.
It's funny what you should say there about a clothing manufacturer particularly. I had a guest on the show, Liberty Watson from Watson X Watson, who's a clothing manufacturer and boutique high-end fashion. She and her sister run the company. They have done for 7 years. They make everything here. And although she said it takes up a lot of her time because a shirt can be made in several locations around Sydney. She has to maybe transport the shirts to have the buttons or the cuffs or whatever it is. I'm not a sewer. You can hear that. It done across. And that takes time. But at the same time, it's a hell of a lot less time than jumping on an aeroplane every 2 weeks and going to Bangladesh or going to China to have those manufacturers checked. And the quality that she's getting is much better. So it's almost speaking in terms of legal as well. There's another big plus for keeping it here and keeping the jobs here and keeping the contracts and the work and hopefully the manufacturing here, because you know where you stand. Everybody's got the same legal system that we have to abide by. And if we're all using similarly worded contracts and they haven't got any English translation issues, then it's a much better way to do business. Look, my regular listeners will know I'll get on my soapbox about offshoring any day. I'm very passionate about it. I really believe we're doing ourselves a great injustice here by offshoring a lot of entry level positions, in particular in the corporate world. But it's something to be said for small business. You have to consider the fact that you've got to go through the trust exercise more. You've got to go through the quality assurance. The legals become more complex. The language barrier, the travel, all of that really adds up. And is that worth what you're going to save in the long run? Is that really worth the effort for the difference of just literally picking up the phone and chatting to someone who's across the suburb?
Well, that's right. And in your example, if the counterparties to the contract outsource their output to overseas or remote locations, well, your risk is on your local counterparty. They take the risk on the externally sourced products or inputs, and if there's a quality issue, they have to address it on your behalf. Otherwise, and you have recourse because your counterparty is local. It helps. That's right. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, I guess I'd say.
But it is worth noting that I think the extra effort that goes into pushing things overseas, definitely. So we've talked about how to engage with a contractor and certain things that you should be keeping an eye out for to make sure that they are in the contract, whether it be, as you mentioned, the confidentiality clause is more difficult to uphold, but it's worth having in there. But definitely what is that clause called that I just...
A restraint.
Restraint, that's it. Yeah, that's a must, really, because you don't want your contractor going directly to the client.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and not too hard to uphold either.
No, that's right. More so than any properly drawn up. Of course, you'd need your lawyer to do that. But properly drawn up, it's quite enforceable and quite appropriate.
The next one I want to focus on really importantly, and this is something that is not only important because it gives you a little bit of legal protection, but also because it makes you look bigger, it makes you look more professional, and it makes you look as though you've been in business longer than potentially that you have. And that's the contract that you have with your client. So irrespective of what it is that you do, let's talk about services, because obviously, everybody else is bound by consumer law if they're purchasing products. But I know that people are bound by consumer law as well when they're purchasing services, but that's a bit more grey. What should be in your client agreement? Is it as simple as having an engagement letter that covers all these things, or does it need to be a specific job? Yeah, look,
I think I'd have an engagement letter with a bolt-on set of standard terms. So really what your client is looking at is the engagement letter, which might be fine-tuning the standard set of terms that follow. So that's a presentational issue, a formatting issue. The arrangement, however you set it up, has to have things like information on your obligations, what your clients are, what you expect from your client, over what period of time. I think you want to both you want to limit your risk or liability and protect your legal interests. It's hard to see you're being liable to a client providing services to you, but it just sets out the ground rules. It's a little bit similar to providing products, things, but again, I've seen it where the party, the client in this case, my client, had quite a detailed set of terms and conditions and an engagement letter, almost overwhelmingly in detail.
Did it ever put anybody off signing it?
Well, it did put off someone paying him.
Well, that didn't work.
No, you can. It fell between two stools, but we got repayment ultimately. We structured an arrangement, but just because you have a lot of terms and conditions and words in your agreement doesn't mean you're going to get paid. Clarity is the essence. And it was a little bit grey in a couple of places, and anyway, I said we should fix this up after the event. Had never heard anything, but we did get payment. So, look, client agreements for services can be as problematic as any. They need not be, but again, how do you measure quality? At times, it can be a bit challenging.
How long's a piece of string kind of question?
Yeah.
I've always suggested that a good place to start for people who are consultants might be their professional association, because quite often they have stock standard engagement letters.
That's true.
As a suggested. I know, for example, the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers supplies my business with an engagement letter, which I can kind of tweak. But here's my question for you, because I always get very nervous about changing anything to do with these really solid contracts. How much am I stuffing it around if I change a few words here and there or add an extra clause? If I put it in, is it no longer a legal document because I'm not a lawyer?
I don't. No, I can put your mind at rest on that. No, you're free to add what you want. Look, I don't think it's going to do too much damage. Or any really. What I would do there is make if you've got special requirements in terms of your engagement with this party, well, you could put that in the covering letter I mentioned a minute ago. Leave your standard terms, say from the Bookkeeping Association, untouched, but in your engagement with this client, you could say, well, here's my standard terms and conditions. Oh, and by the way, this is in a covering letter. Another condition I want to add to our contract is that.
No, that's a good idea. And that can be also written in the body of an email when you're sending.
Well, yeah, that's right. The email could comprise an attachment of standard terms plus the narration saying, and in addition, this is something else I wanted to add to our agreement. If you agree, please reply, please acknowledge and return, and we're underway. And yeah, your contract, your agreement comprises the attached standard terms plus whatever you put in the body of the email.
Now, there's something I was really busting to ask you about, which is this sentence that I hear about people adding into contracts. And I wanted to know if it really is legal. It's something that says, basically, if you continue this conversation or you continue this either email trail or you continue to engage with us on any level, that we will take that to mean that you accept our terms and conditions. That I've heard that these sentences get buried in the middle of contracts, and it means that providing that people are still literally responding to an email, that you can take that as an acceptance.
Bound. Yeah.
What's your thinking on that? Because that sort of makes me think, well, you could put anything into a contract and they won't read it and they're not signing anything. Is that still considered legal because you've continued the arrangement or the discussion?
Well, the discussion is negotiation. It doesn't mean you're bound. So, look, it's you're engaging with them to set the framework of an agreement. I don't see how they could say that if that you're thereby bound to take their services or may place a product order. I would argue that's negotiation. Oddly enough, though, we as lawyers in our standard engagement letters that the Law Society requires us to send to clients and such as small business, we say you can formally acknowledge this letter, or you can simply continue to instruct us. And that's a kind of echoes what you're saying then. And people have the option of just continuing to instruct. And that's more clear cut, I think, than the scenario you were sketching.
So it's a little bit about the wording of that sentence, do you think? In that if you continue to instruct us, you're bound by the terms and conditions of
we say, well, if you continue to instruct us, we take it that you've accepted our terms of engagement. It's a little bit more softer than that.
Yeah, I think because the concern is people just don't bother to A, read it, and B, sign it and return the documents.
Yeah, that's true. And they're often busy and they want to get on with their own business too. And but steering away from what we as lawyers do, I in the scenario, I think it's a little bit duplicitous in the scenario you were sketching for someone to be saying, well, this endless email exchange means you've engaged with us, that ultimately you're going to place an order or accept our services, and whether or not we have a formal sign-off. If that's the scenario you're sketching, then I'd say that's not right.
Well, we're going to take another quick break here on Small Biz Matters. We're having a fantastic talk with Alan McDougall from Keypoint Law. He's telling us all about contracts and why they are so important for you to have in your business. Keep listening to get more expert advice here on Small Biz Matters. We'll be back after these short announcements. And welcome back to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. That was a very teeny-weeny little community service announcement. You're listening here live to Small Biz Matters, and we're talking today all about contracts and the importance of having those as a small business. Now, you might have just started, you might just be a little, maybe a little boutique-y thing, maybe you're just having a market stall, you might just be considering this a bit of a hobby. Now, Alan, when is a really good time to start putting out those contracts out there? Because a lot of the times we have that transitional period between, I'm just dabbling, or I'm actually what's that word where is it night owling? No. Midnighting? No. What's the word? When you do things at night and you work full time.
And you have a day job.
Yeah, you got a day job.
You've still got a day job.
Yeah.
Look,
when do you put these in place? When's the perfect time? I suppose you've got to say as soon as you start behaving like a business, really.
Yeah, well, look, the time is, you'll know the time. A few years ago, I prepared a contract for a young builder. He was in his 20s. He was running, he was running well, strongly with business, renos, home renovations, small commercial premises. He had no contract. Had no set of
what? And he was
terms.
Building.
And he was building. He just had paperwork. He had the specs, the technical specs, the amounts that he was going to charge, and he'd been going along okay. But he reached a point in his business. He knew that he couldn't go on like this, and he'd been successful. It appears, there hadn't been a problem that had prompted him to come to me. It was a referral. He just knew.
But there are things that keep us protected, because in conducting business ourselves, we are consuming products, and there are business-to-business laws that can't be overwritten with crappy contracts, which is what we alluded to at the beginning of the program.
That's right.
So in some way, because we've got a strong judicial system.
That's right. Well, we have what are technically called statutory warranty or statutory guarantees out there now in the consumer small business vein. And there was an interesting situation recently where the two of the big car makers, suppliers, Holden and Ford, were arguing that their business warranties prevailed in the event of a dispute with a customer about product quality, and the regulator, the national regulator, the ACCC, Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, said no, you can't say that to your customers. You've got to remind them that statutory warranties override your supplier warranties, and they were a bit cross about that. So
because they had a monopoly on all the servicing. That's why.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. So your point, Alexi, is absolutely right that there is a framework out there, and a lot of laws perhaps more than we need, but they are well-intentioned, and they are there to protect small business and consumers in the day-to-day.
So on the one hand, we might complain about all the red tape and compliance and regulation that we have to uphold, but at the same time, some of those things are there to protect us.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of them.
Now, a quick question in regards to just contracts in general. If I send out my engagement letter, which might be 5 or 6 pages, and my client, because we're getting digital signatures, sends back 1 page with the signature on it, but not the entire document.
Fine.
It's
that's
fine?
fine. It's fine.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. Because I keep on... My poor clients, I keep on going back to them, oh no, can you send me back the whole document with one of the pages signed? So that's not necessary.
Not necessary.
Awesome. So it's just the signature we need. Yay, that's great. I've just saved us all a whole bunch of time. And the other element, of course, which is really important to have contracts and absolutely crucial, I think, is of course your employees.
Yes.
And that one is just, I mean, that you're nuts really not to have a contract without. It's not a must though, is it? You don't.
Well, it's good practice. You don't. The regulator, in this case, the Fair Work Ombudsman, might have cause to have a look at if an employee felt unfairly dismissed, for example, and you want a nice little agreement in place, and these are pretty simple. The award employees I'm talking about, you need to know what awards they're under, what their rights are. There are all these principles on the Fair Work Ombudsman's website that can tell you. You don't need me to read a website. It's good practice, and I was quite alarmed recently when I helped a new client who said, well, we've just bought a business and we've found that none of the employees, award employees, have contracts, have agreements.
And they would have been working for them for years.
They were working on a handshake. And it's now there was a clear lack of due diligence in the purchase of business scenario there, but we were able to assist the client, strap her up after the event. But it's not much trouble just to have your employees written down and just a couple of pages, and it's a housekeeping thing that should be attended to.
And again, if you've got those digitally signed, you can of course scan them in and keep them as soft copies. You don't have to keep the hard copies.
Exactly right.
Now that brings me up to the last really important point I wanted to discuss with you, which is purchasing and the movement, the transacting as a business as a whole. So buying a business, selling a business. Now you just gave a great example of someone who didn't do due diligence when they were purchasing a business. Would you say this is one of the most important times to make sure that you've got a lawyer looking over the books, looking over the legal standing, looking over the contract to actually purchase, making sure your contract looks good? Is that, to me, I can't understand people who do buy businesses on a handshake. That's just crazy.
Well, that's right. That's right. Look, often people do that. Well, we know that, and you again, it's about risk, how you assess risk, and lawyers can mitigate risk, particularly when you don't know the party selling the business or from whom you're buying. It gives a degree of comfort that you're getting what you're paying for, or you're selling what you want to sell. But it's not. It is labour intensive drawing up a contract or reviewing it and so forth in the context of sale of business. My advice is to do your homework. Know what you're buying or know what you want to sell. Particularly the buyer. Go in there and understand the business. Don't waste money on me until you know what you want. And that's the best I can do. But it is labour intensive for the lawyer, particularly if he is or she is negotiating with a lawyer on the other side. We can't control that. And it can be as expensive to sell a $25,000 business as a $250,000 business. I'm sorry, but that's a fact of life.
And what are some of those things you mentioned before, doing due diligence before engaging with, and therefore sort of saving yourself some time and money with your legal team? What, apart from the financials, I think we're pretty good at understanding that we need to look at financials and moving. But from a legal point of view, you mentioned the employment contracts. There's one.
All the contracts we've been talking about so far this morning, supplier contracts, financing arrangements, is the bank involved?
Where's money owed?
That's right.
Insurance?
Exactly right. Premises, leases. What are you buying? What is the business structure? Is there any money owed that's not accounted for. Look,
memberships. Like if they've got software contracts, or maybe they've got some phone lines that have got sort of 2 years of the contract still to go.
Right.
Yeah, those sort of things.
Yeah, that's right. That's an asset of the business, arguably, that it's got to be, you've got to know. Look, I think accountants play a critical role in this environment, Alexi, and you've got to have a good accountant on your side, or the business has to have a good accountant. And if that's a comfort factor, hopefully on both sides, and your accountants can set you up quite nicely in terms of the commercial understanding, and we can work very well with them when we write down or review what's going to happen in the contractual sense.
So once you've done your due diligence and you've got your contracts written up, then you've got almost a bit of room to manoeuvre, because you might find that there's some things they haven't been open with.
Yeah.
And then you can roll it back and say, well, look, we've just discovered that there's a $100,000 overhead we weren't made aware of, so we're going to reduce our offer.
Or even you can stagger the payments, or structure the offer that there's a retention made, there's an earn-in or earn-out period where you can get a handle on the business and seek out these things. And your protection, if you're the buyer, is you don't pay everything in one go. You pay
just like the coffee cups.
That's exactly right. And my analogy before of the business sold on a handshake actually had a structured payment arrangement. It was going to, the purchase price for the business was going to be paid monthly in monthly instalments. So those parties there did think about it. They did protect themselves, that the new party coming in would get to understand the business, and that performance was what was represented, and a
good handover.
Exactly right. So look, there are ways we can deal with this, and I'd urge people to write them down. Have your lawyer write them down. And then at the 12 months' time when the final payment is due, you can read what you agreed back in the past and said, well, provided X and Y and Z are there, I can hand over the final money, or I can let the business go.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely been a fantastic program today. Thank you so much for sharing us all of your business expertise and all of your wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much. So you've been listening to Triple H. We've been talking a little bit about contract law and when to engage, when to actually have these things written up, when it's important. It's basically important all the time, but it's not as complex and as difficult as you think it might be. But don't be afraid of your legal team. They are part of your team. They're part of your arsenal. And in some cases, they're absolutely crucial for you moving forward in your business or purchasing a business. So make sure you check out Alan's website. Alan, do you want to give us a quick plug for your web page?
Yes, keypointlaw.com.au.
Awesome. So make sure you get in touch with them. Great local firm. And of course, thank you very much for listening, everyone. We're back on Tuesdays every week, 9 till 10. We've got a great bunch of guests coming up in the next couple of months. We are chockers with expertise to give you for your small business. So make sure you listen 9 till 10 on every Tuesday here on Triple H 100.1 FM. I'll see you all next week.